information about this hybrid meeting. This meeting has been recorded and live streamed. Please, as Mr. Clay has pointed out, can you keep your microphones on mute until you need to use them? And it would be the central button for all of you, but please remember to switch them off once you're finished, because it's difficult for other people to speak when they are still switched on. It also causes a bit of feedback as well. If you'd like to speak, could you just please raise your hand? Because obviously we're going to have a lot of questions forward after the presentations. And if you feel that one's particularly pertinent to your area of work, all need to see those hands up. Thank you. For those online, the chat function must not be used to have conversations with other participants, as everything is recorded. It should only be used to alert us to the fact that you wish to speak or to raise points of order or to report tech problems. And officers, we've got wonderful Mario online with us. Yes, he's there. He'll be able to assist us with any eventualities that happen. This is a formal meeting, so please note that the press may be in attendance, albeit online, and the right to the press and public to record and film apply. Okay. So far, in terms of apologies, we've received apologies for absence from Councillor Palace and Councillor Ozen. I don't believe there's any other apologies for absence. No. And virtually, we've got Councillor Root. In terms of commission members online, and that's it so far.
We're expecting Councillor Rathbone.
Councillor Rathbone is on his way remotely.
We've also got members of other commissions.
Moving on to agenda item 2, urgent items and order of business. I believe there are no urgent items. None have been brought to my attention. Thank you. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest in respect to members of the Commission? No, thank you. Okay. In terms of the substantive elements of the agenda, policing of drug use. This item's kind of tabled in for an hour and 40 minutes. I do apologise. Well, maybe you're happy about that. I am. Thank you. Introduction. As part of its continued work on building trust and confidence and inclusive policing, Living in Hackney Scrutiny Commission is here to hear about the approach to the policing of drugs in the borough. The Commission sees a discussion as timely, given that Hackney has been involved in the ADA Accelerator programme of work, which has impacted on the policing of drug use and the pathways that exist between the criminal justice system and community substance use treatment. It is also timely, given the government's white paper on tougher consequences for the possession of drugs, which, if successful and becomes law, carries the risk of further marginalising vulnerable residents and the over-policing of vulnerable communities. Particular focus will be given to the approach of policing low-level drug use in Hackney, how effective the approach is, and how consistently it is used across communities. The governance structures and decision-making processes in place related to this approach. The Commission will be assisted in its discussions today by the contributions from representatives of Central East Borough Command Unit, Hackney Council Public Health, and Council Commissioned Substance Misuse Services, SWIM and Turning Point. There's a lot of alliteration there, but I got through it. Okay, attending for this item, actually I should add, we've got a lot of people online as well, and we may invite other people other than those specifically appointed to specific areas of work to respond. So there may be a multitude of answers which we need for one answer. So please don't feel offended if that happens. So attending for this item, we've got Metropolitan Police, Central East Borough Command Unit. If you could just raise your hand so we know who you are. We've got Interim Borough, okay, I was going to do by name, but that was nice. All in unison as well. Interim Borough Commander Dan Rutland.
I'd like to introduce myself. I'm actually no longer the Borough Commander. I have the Borough Commander who started today, sat next to me. So my role, probably still pertinent for this. I'm the Public Protection Lead for Central East. So I deal with the safeguarding children, DA,
Okay,
that sort of aspect.
Okay.
That comes into play in this conversation as well.
Okay.
So
that's brilliant.
me, the boss.
Thank you, boss.
Thanks. So
I think we lost the committee room.
I think we have.
No comment.
Mario, can you get us back?
Yes, I'll be in contact with Craig.
Thank you.
Hopefully
We'll have him rejoin shortly.
That's it, great. Thank you. In terms of Met Police representation, finally,
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sean Lyons, Deputy Chief Inspector. I'm the lead for Project Adder.
thank you very much. In respect of Hackney Council, we've got Councillor Susan Fajana Thomas, Cabinet Member for Community Safety and Regulatory Services. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Lovett, Deputy Director of Public Health, City of London and London Borough of Hackney. He's online.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. Andrew.
That's okay to keep the TV on.
Oh,
You guys carry on.
Andrew Tratton or Tratton? Tratton, thank you.
Consultant in public health for City of London and Hackney, and portfolio with substance use, mental health, and some other areas.
Okay, thank you. And Simon Young.
Hi there, I'm Simon Young, Health Systems Coordinator for the Public Health Team. I've been overseeing the rollout of ADA from a public health perspective.
Thank you. From SWIM, we've got Peter Merrifield.
It's a miracle, yes.
Oh, thank you. Turning Point, Owen Bolger. Is Owen, I hope I'm saying this correctly. Is he online?
Yes.
Maybe.
Right, no, I can't see. Maybe I'll jump in. And Piers Adams.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
And Turning Point. Do you have any Turning Point representatives?
Not sure
No, they're not. No, okay. Not to worry. Okay, we also have some members of the Children and Young People and Health in Hackney Scrutiny Commissions attending online. Some aspects of the topics being discussed are relevant personal portfolios. We've got Councillor Ben Hayhurst online. We've also got Councillor Patrick. She's been involved with this area of work. She's previously been Chair of Living in Hackney, and police have been an ongoing subject matter which she's looked into. Councillor Sophie Conway, the Chair of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Commission. Hello, Sophie. And they're all online. They may, again, as I said, have a need to ask questions, which I hope you'll be kind of open to accommodating.
Chair, is it just worth pointing out it's an opportunity, good bit of opportunity for cross commission working against different commissions here, which I think is why we're all here as different chairs in terms of the health aspects. And so, yeah, it's a good example of that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hayhurst. So thank you all for being here. I'd now like to invite I'm still inviting the interim borough commander, the previously interim borough commander, to present.
Yeah, I'm going to.
Yeah. Dan Rutland and Detective Chief Inspector Jason Lyons to give a brief presentation to supplement the written submissions received in advance of this meeting. And can I thank you for taking the time out to provide us with the additional slide on nitrous oxide in the nighttime economy, which was circulated earlier on today. These will be included as an appendix to the published minutes. You're going to have up to 15 minutes for your presentation. So thank you very much, and please feel free to go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to the scrutiny panel tonight. I think it's a really important opportunity to let you know and everyone know what we are doing from a police perspective and also from a partnership perspective across the police. I think it's important to say that I'm not the resident expert on this. I'm going to pass the buck to Sean, and Sean is going to talk to Operation ADA and the holistic work that we do. But I think just as an introduction, I think I'd like to say from a Central East point of view, police point of view, and specifically Hackney, why we think drugs and looking at the drugs market and drug use is really important to the ECU. cuts across all themes of policing, and I think it's never been so evident as it is now. And if you think about drug use or drug supply, you know, it touches victims of domestic violence, street crime violence, base violence. It touches ASB across the borough on our estates and within our parks, mental health, street population. I don't think there's a topic or a strand of work police are involved in that drugs doesn't have some input to or interface with. So I think it's really important from our perspective. It's one of our sort of major sort of pieces of work on what we devote our time to, as I say, across public protection, across investigation, across all our strands, neighbourhoods, etc. I think it's fair to say that our approach has been developed over a number of years. There's sort of small acorns. I think going back 5 or 6 years, drugs were a major, I'd say, priority of the MPS. I think it has developed. I think we've seen that. It's gone from being maybe a crime that every time we find a drugs crime, we're finding crime and adding to our crime figures. I think that approach has certainly seen a sea change. And I think from top sort of MPC level, COG level, we are looking at drugs holistically. That approach has gone from, I think, Operation Continuum to drugs focused desk to in our gangs work, and now ADA, which is probably ADA and Martin, which is probably the overarching operations that deliver the drugs work on the BC from a police perspective. I think we will show tonight in our presentation that it goes from drugs misuse at a very low level, user level, our problem-solving approach, all the way up to organised crime, criminal networks and gangs. And I suppose just to cover off, I think that I've touched on it there. I think everything that we touch as a police force locally on Hackney has a drugs connection, so it's really important to us. Sean's going to go through the presentation. I think what we've done is we've sent quite a lot of detail in those presentations, in those 2 presentations, that you could probably present for 2 or 3 hours. So it's going to be a very light touch with a view to the fact that I think you've done that as a pre-read, and that we'll take questions and answers after that. But that's all the opening. Boss, do you want to add anything to that, just from a perspective of why it's important?
No, I mean, it covered off the main points. It's important to us because it's a predecessor of so much of the really dangerous offending that we're here to deal with. So much of the violence, so much of our broader safeguarding challenges, our exploitation of vulnerability, our exploitation of women. Trace many of those, the starting point of many of those challenges is a drugs market. The problem isn't necessarily individuals if they're in the user space, and the public health approach is sitting at the heart of that. But the problem is a drugs market, which drives so much of the violence and the wider challenges which policing and the community face here. What I think we've seen, and it's really interesting coming into Hackney from outside and not having seen those last 5 years, but arrive at this point, is a really rapid maturing of the approach and the simplification of approach, which recognises that public health treatment aspect, the demand reduction, which is so critical to stabilising a market, coupled with our USP, which is the disruptive element at the higher end of the market where we can start taking effect. There is, of course, a border crossing in that activity, and that's where the really interesting and the real challenging partnership work originates in how we manage and deconflict some of that activity in a centre where the organised crime aspect starts crashing into the public health and the vulnerability aspects of something. But I think that's what we'll hear from Sean, a really great example, frankly, a leading national, if not certainly in London, not national leading example of how on Hackney we sought to find an interface between those 2 elements.
And sorry, just one thing I didn't touch on, which I think is important at the current work, is the exploitation of young people in our community, sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation of young people. That is touched on that and the work that we're doing around that. So if there are any questions in that sort of forum, please bring them up at the end. I'll have to answer them. Sure.
Thank you. So I'll touch on our journey around Project Ada. One of the initial questions around the Commission was, what is the strategic direction of the Met? And very much Project Ada and the health approach, working jointly with Andrew and Simon, is our strategic approach. It's not just about enforcement. So we were given the opportunity to become a Project Ada site in April 2021 with funding from the Home Office, funding into public health from OID. Thank you. So essentially it gave us more money for proactivity, additional resources to target OCNs and those dealing drugs in the streets. whilst at the same time giving more money to public health to cut crime and the cycle of misuse and offending. For Central East, that meant a real intensified approach to tackling drug misuse, combining proactivity to target OCMs, drug dealers, but also bringing recovery services, treatment services into that forum as well, and working under a partnership banner, which Mr. Rutland mentioned. We've had it for many years within Central East, which is Operation Continuum. We initially set out, Simon and myself, working jointly to have governance structures in place, so delivery groups sitting across both local authorities. So we work jointly with colleagues from Town Hamlets as well as the BCU, driving partnership work and sharing intelligence and innovation, police accelerator group to drive policing activity, and then as the boss will come into a BCU-wide strategy group that sits every quarter to drive proactivity, partnership working, innovation that then we report back to the Home Office. And the four key headlines there are what we're measured against from the Home Office: reduction in drug-related deaths, which I may touch on later, reduction in drug-related offending, reduction in prevalence of drug use, and then the main one, the main policing area, I guess, disruption of high-harm criminals, and middle market networks and firearms, because we know that they're all linked to drug supply. Next slide. This is just a bit of an overview of the governance structures there, so we don't need to go too much into that. This next slide is interesting, one that Simon and I put this together for the London Drugs Forum, didn't we, that we sat on with Deputy Mayor, Police and Crime, Seth Linden, and this was looking at the implementation of Project Adder across Hackney and Town Hamlets, and really has been, I think, the model for what will become the combat and drugs partnerships, which are now in place. And as you can see, it isn't just about enforcement, it's about the bringing together of services, looking at that partnership approach, holistic approach to look at the usage and the supply of drugs and how we can work better to reduce both. Next slide focuses more on enforcement. So we know that drugs is a driver of violent crime. We know that drugs and dealing of drugs is a way to tackle that. So we know that violence is intrinsically linked to drug supply. Within Central East, within Hackney, we're leading the Met in terms of tackling those that deal drugs on the streets. As you can see there, the numbers of persons that have been charged for drugs trafficking is significant, along with seizures, cash seizures, and those arrested for drug supply offences. Our ambition is to stay in that middle market space, improving our coordination, our capability locally, using the existing teams that we've got. What Project Adder gave us and what it continues to give us is finances and funding to have proactivity in the supply space, but at the same time recognising that it's not just about enforcement, it's also about developing pathways to treatment, drug testing on arrest, widening the use of alcohol disposals, and getting people into treatment early through intervention and education. We were able to increase our capacity within the Integrated Offender Management Unit to ensure that people that work prolific offenders are referred into treatment. We know that, if you look at shoplifting and other type crimes, that's often fueled by drug use. So ensuring those people seek the help that they need through Simon and his team and Andrew, and working with our colleagues from Turning Point. One of the main areas that the Met wasn't really fully involved in was around drug-related deaths and how we could work with our colleagues from health around reducing drug-related deaths within the community, those in treatment, and preventing those deaths from happening initially. So how we can take the learning, we took learning from Blackpool, from colleagues in the north, the other partnership, and brought it back down to London, and now that's going out across the entire Met and across London. The next slide is a sort of more of a visual representation around our approach to tackling drug dealing. As you can see, the red line indicates our sort of trajectory over the last few years. Mr. Rutland mentioned it. We've always had a strong focus on drugs trafficking. Project Adder started in April 2021, and that increased that even further. So again, looking at taking those that are harming our community and dealing drugs within our streets. Next slide. Where are we going next? Adder is very much the strategic direction of the Met. It's not just about enforcement, obviously working in tandem. So how do we do that? Understanding the drugs profile of the borough. We've developed with colleagues from Public Health a drugs profile that looks at drugs versus violence and usage, and that's shared with partners. Look at those strategic areas and tackle them in a partnership setting. Pan London Learning, so we're part of the London Drugs Forum that sits at City Hall, widening the reach of our drugs focus tests that Mr. Rutland mentioned. Drugs focus tests are there to drive investigations around drug misuse, drug trafficking, I should say, and how we can improve our outcomes for that. Where we're looking to go in the future is looking at more precision policing around financial investigation, the use of communications data through county lines teams, for example, Operation Orchard, which is a Home Office funded county lines team. And then I mentioned Operation Yamata there, which is another Home Office funded team that we have here in Central within Hackney, looking at London drugs lines, which is now expanding across London. The strategic direction of the Met is to have ADA and Yamata working across the whole of London. We're now extending to other BCUs. We're extended to 2025, as you can see there. We've extended into Lambeth, Southwark, Camden and Islington. And we're looking to secure further MOPAC funding in order to do that. Why are we doing that? Because our colleagues in public health have got a significant amount of investment from the substance misuse grants, and we're also looking to work in partnership with them, and Simon will be talking more detail around that in a minute, no doubt. The next slide is more Hackney colleagues focused. Simon, I don't want to steal your thunder, so I'll probably leave that one, but it's really just to show that we're not working in isolation. We're very much working in a partnership setting, but we can cover off to the next slide. What has it left us in terms of legacy? Significant investment into Hackney, taking us up to 2025. That's now extending across the Met, across London and other local areas. Government, national, London and Met-wide influence around Project ADA, what we're doing locally and how that can roll out across the entire capital. But the real legacy is the partnership working. The combat and drugs partnerships, which is now coming online following Project ADA. That is the legacy of it, that works hand in hand around the 10-year drug strategy that's released from central government. And that mantra is simple, that we will focus on drug supply, we'll clear drug dealers away from problematic areas, leaving space for partners to working in partnership with them to reduce drug misuse, drug-related deaths and crime and associated violence. And that is essentially what we're trying to do under Operation Continue.
Thank you. Police efficiency right on time. Thank you very much. Okay, we're not going to take questions at this stage. We're going to move on to the health approach. So thank you for that. But so we're going to, is Simon's going to do this piece for us? Okay, so we're moving on to Simon Young, Health Systems Coordinator at Hackney Council, who's going to provide a brief presentation as a supplement to the written documentation already provided for the agenda. You're going to have up to 10 minutes for this, and then we're going to collectively address questions to you all respectively. Thank you very much.
Yes, if I may, so Andrew Chapman, consultant in public health. I'll just give just 1 or 2 minutes by me to introduction, context setting, but then I'll hand it to the experts.
That's fine. Okay.
In the field. So it's just to kind of add a bit more the nuance to what people are doing. After more than 10 years of disinvestment from drug treatment services, we have seen nationally an increase in drug deaths and drug and alcohol-related harms. Hackney's been no different to that. And in 2021, the government did release their strategy. There's not an enormous amount of public consultation on that strategy, but their 3 pillars were to break supply chains, develop world-class treatment, and reduce the demand. And we are broadly supportive of that, and Simon will elaborate on the great work we're doing in many aspects in conjunction with the police. One point that I'd really like to make is that drugs cause social problems, and we understand that, but we should recognise that that works in reverse as well. Social problems create conditions for take drugs, and that reciprocal relationship is where our interests lie in public health, is trying to create happier, healthier environments for people to be. So that's the root of our effort in prevention. Recently we've seen a government white paper, Swift, Tough, Certain, which lays out quite a stringent approach to reducing demand. It's quite punitive and a number of professional bodies, Faculty of Public Health, Royal College of Physicians have expressed their concerns around that approach. Things like mandatory drug courses, which people have to pay for. We've got concerns about how that might exacerbate inequalities and create more potential harm than it might cause. Overall, there's not very much evidence to suggest that is the right way forwards. So we do stand by those professional bodies in having some concerns about that approach. Having said that, that is the context in which we are working, and we are having some really great successes, which Sean's alluded to and Simon will elaborate on in a moment. So I think at that point I'll hand over to you, Simon.
Thanks very much. So just a whistle-stop journey through the paper which I've submitted. Great context from both colleagues in the police and Andrew. I think one of the things that's really important to talk about, try to hammer home in the paper, is that drugs as a determinant of social challenges, that social challenges as a determinant of drug use are really important to think about, to talk about. But especially so in Hackney, where there's a real kind of volume of individuals who are using drugs. So using the crime survey estimates, which is a national-based estimate, to think about the number of individuals in Hackney who are using drugs. Last year, 16,455 individuals aged between 16 and 59 years old used some form of drug. That was 5,535 of those individuals being between the ages of 16 and 24. Now, of course, using a drug at some point in time over the past year isn't necessarily an indication of a real significant problem. So we've also drilled further into the number of individuals who are using drugs more regularly, so more than once a month. Nationally, that figure is much, much lower, but again, when we translate that into raw figures of individuals in the borough who are using drugs on a regular basis, it's quite a significant number. So 4,650 individuals between 16 and 59 are frequent drug users. 1,399 of those individuals are aged between 16 and 24. Now that's quite a scale. That's a big volume of people that are using drugs that could be harming them, that could be harming people around them, and could be harming society also. Within Hackney, of course, we are already doing an awful lot of work to try and work with more and more individuals. We operate the Hackney Recovery Service, which is the main drug treatment facility that we utilise in the borough, which is delivered by Turning Point. It's a shame they're not here today to be able to talk to their work, but that's a service that delivers a psychosocial model of intervention to every single individual that comes through their door. In a nutshell, that's trying to work out what that person needs to stay happy, healthy, and away from the harm of drug use. They also use pharmaceutical interventions where this is necessary. That's particularly of note where somebody may be using opiates and they need a replacement to be able to remain kind of free from using heroin, using other forms of opiates. And that's really, really positive. I think one of the things that we've spoken a lot about over the past year and a half with the work of ADA is looking to try and meet more of the needs that are presented across the borough. Again, high volumes of individuals using service, not comparable in terms of the number of people that are then accessing our teams and accessing our support. So we were sitting at around about a 63% level of unmet need for individuals across the borough. That's a higher number, particularly if we then apply that figure to the number of individuals who think they could be using drugs regularly in Hackney. So over the past year and a half, we've looked at our services, we've tried to assess how we can get those teams, get the individuals who are absolutely desperate for support into our service and into support. So we've increased outreach, and our outreach services have increased by about 300%. We see Turning Point going out over 100 times in meeting over 100 individuals every single month in their own homes to try and make sure that they get people through the doors and into service. We've increased the pipeline of referral through from a multitude of services, but I think most pertinent to this committee is the work that we've done with the police. So Sean briefly touched on out-of-court disposals, which in a very kind of brief way are a way of ensuring that somebody can be referred through into service without reprimanding, without giving them criminal records, without making them feel like there is a punitive approach to them, and that's what we need. When we're talking about working with vulnerable people who are using drugs regularly, that's absolutely the route that we need to take. Unfortunately, over COVID, we saw a decline in the number of criminal justice referrals that were coming through to Turning Point and our other support services. Those are increasing now. And that's partly because of the out-of-court disposals. That's partly because of working closer with the custody suite down in Stoke Newington and making sure more people are drug tested on arrest, and that again they are referred through to service. That's partly the work that we've done alongside the police and the adult social care team to make sure that where the police are coming into contact with somebody who is evidently particularly vulnerable, they're making a murder referral through to services rather than turning a blind eye to whatever that individual is engaging in. And I think that's been a really positive approach. Overall, for our services, we've seen an increase in new people, so treatment naive individuals coming through to our services. Those are people that have never gone through our doors to receive support before. We've seen an increase in the number of people who month on month are staying in service and receiving the treatment that they need. We've seen a decrease in the number of individuals who are leaving our service in a negative fashion. And we've seen a huge decrease in the number of people that are representing for support. Which indicates that individuals are getting the support that they want, getting the support that they need, leading happier, healthier lives, aren't leaving service, and then aren't having to reapproach for further support. Another aspect of work that we've done with ADA is looking at some of the other services that we can work with to try and change access to overall treatment. So we've brought more lived experience into the borough. We're working with a service called St Giles Trust, who deliver peer-led employment support. And I think really pertinently, we're working with support when it matters. Unfortunately, people who identify as being from a Black ethnic group are significantly underrepresented in our treatment system. Support when it matters works with individuals who identify as being, again, of a Black ethnic group, delivering a culturally sensitive approach to their support needs. I can pass now to Peter to present, unless the chair needs to delay that a little bit.
Okay, we've got a couple of minutes and then we'll have to move on to questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody, and I'll try and be as brief as I can. I may struggle with that somewhat, however I will give it the best shot I can. So we are support when it matters. I set the organisation up as somebody who's born and bred in Hackney, 60 years of age. I've seen all what's gone on in the borough, had a 20+ year addiction to crack cocaine and heroin, absolutely created havoc in my life. And what I saw when I got clean and sober in 2006 was I just saw very few people who looked like me coming through services, staying in recovery, rebuilding their lives, and all the beautiful things that go with that. And I saw a systemic problem, and I saw that really what was needed was we needed a service which was going to reflect the group we were trying to attract. So Swim was set up in 2019, and what we did is we came together, primarily a group of Black men who have long-term recovery, and I like to underpin, we're not just talking about abstinence, we're talking about recovery, which is quite different. And we put together a program that we know we're going to look at some of the themes and the areas that were going to be really pertinent to people of colour around their culture, around religion, around discipline, around masculinity, around all of these kind of things, around trauma in particular, and the impact of trauma on our community, and then the effects of that. And so Swim was born. The opportunity came for us to be part of the delivery partners for Project ADA. We knew that what we could do and what we aimed to do was to create that conduit, right, between the community, trust, so people brought their whole selves, but linking that in with our partners, the police, probation, substance treatment providers. And what we found, put plain and simply, because people trusted us, they were much more inclined to engage in those services, right? Because we were advocating on behalf of those services, but we were carrying the message, one might say, of the benefits of getting involved in those services. And I think it's fair to say, and I'll just wrap up on this really, is we've had a huge impact, I think, across the system, across the community, not only just through the standard referral pathways, but I would say through word of mouth. And what happens is we pick up those people who hitherto would not actually attend anywhere, but because they trust the experiences they've had with swim, the programs they've got, the outcomes, they tend to tell their family, tell their friends, and so on and so forth. And then our partnership, which I'll end on this, I think has been hugely successful with the police. We know we're regular attendees on a Wednesday as part of the multi-agency team, and we have a really close and trusting partnership. And I think that has led to some really great improvements in people's lives and ultimately their offending and their substance misuse. So I'll leave it there, but I think that's what tries to kind of encapsulate, I think, what we've been doing.
We have Owen and Piers from Turning Point who have just joined us. I'm not sure if you want to give them 2 minutes to explain what they do too.
Okay, can do that. Thank you, Owen and Piers. Just need to advise to check whether you want to have 2 minutes just to provide a brief overview of the services that you provide, or whether you're just happy to kind of remain in the mix as we start to put forward questions.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so my name is Owen. Well done for pronouncing it correctly, thanks for that. And I'm the Regional Head of Operations for Turning Point. And Turning Point have delivered the substance misuse services in partnership with Mind and London Friends in Hackney in the city since October 2020. So really great to be here with you and, listening into some of the other presentations. It's a great time to be in Hackney. And we've actually got Piers, who's our SOM, with us as well today.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Piers Adamson. I'm the Senior Operations Manager for the service in City and Hackney. And I've been managing the service for coming up to 12 months now. So, yeah, as Owen said, I've just been here listening to the other presentations and listening to Peter. It's great to hear about Swim. And, we've been working closely with them the whole time I've been in Hackney. And, yeah, happy to field any questions anyone has.
Thank you very much to both of you. So now, okay, I'm going to invite commission members to ask any questions they may have to any of our guests. Please note for this session, we've only got an hour after following your presentations. Thank you. Our first question, we've got Councillor Root. Would you like to go ahead, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks very much for the presentations. I thought they were very clear and really positive, actually. I got the impression that the Project Adder approach is very much in keeping with what I would see as being the priorities for most Hackney residents when it comes to how to deal with drugs. And if I might just kind of try to characterise that as trying to crack down on the organised crime elements of the drug trade, trying to deal with the ASB at the sort of street dealing level. But then when it comes to vulnerable people with addiction problems, helping them with appropriate treatment. I think by and large, that is the attitude of most Hackney residents, what they want to see, and that seems to chime really well with Project Adder to me. That said, it does worry me, and there is concern about the government's white paper, which appears to be looking at tougher consequences for the possession of drugs, and that, for me, carries the risk of further marginalising vulnerable residents. So there seems to be a contrast between that approach and the one that's being taken here locally. And I wonder what various people here think about the likely impact should the white paper be successful and become law. Not least because our stats in Hackney seem to be bearing out the success of the Adder approach. So I'd like to feel that we could be getting that message through to the Home Office to perhaps divert them from the approach in the white paper.
Thank you, Councillor Roots. Thank you.
The white paper was an interesting one. Simon and I were kind of consulted around the white paper and when it came out, and it was very much a contrast from obviously the Project Adder approach. Obviously from probably a separate part of the Home Office. For me, the white paper was very much looking at recreational drug use. Recreational drug use probably around the nighttime economy areas, within the city, within Canary Wharf, for example, if we're looking at RBCU, and how we can work with partners in those areas to try and reduce drug use. So that's what we took away from it. obviously it isn't going to change our strategic approach. I think under Project Adder, it's very much the way in which we're looking is diversion of those that need help and support into drugs treatment, referring vulnerable people through our safeguarding mechanisms into social care, mental health, drugs treatment partners, and then as you mentioned rightly, focusing heavily on the organised criminal networks that are dealing drugs within our communities. I can't see it impacting on what we're doing and moving away from that strategic approach.
Okay. I was also going to add to that as well. Is I think whatever legislation comes in, we have always, as a police force, got to be proportionate and balanced. And I think taking apart very serious crime where you can't use a stepped approach or have any discretion, and talk about serious offences, murder, rape, stuff like that. Low-level crimes, and let's be frank, low-level possession of single amounts of drugs in the setting that we're talking about, I think we will maintain a view as local police that a stepped approach would always be beneficial.
Right.
So you know, you're always going to start possibly have to arrest people, but once we're in custody, it's about diversion, giving people the opportunity and the help and the referrals that they need. At some point, that may come to a caution or criminal caution or however that works. And if it keeps going, it may end up in court. But I think that is a natural progression for any crime that we deal with or any issue at a low level. We've got to have a starting point, the diversion and you know, trying to help people at first point. But I think we can maintain that, and we can deliver the policing response that's relevant to our area, even if the legislation's there. I mean, we've got quite draconian legislation in certain offences and crimes, and we still can use our discretion. That's always been there for the boss. I don't know whether we.
Yeah, I mean, two things which make this country quite attractive to live in and engage with the police, I think, is one, that police officers don't have a role in writing the law, and it's a very positive thing. So governments write law, and we wait to see what they decide, and then we choose how we implement it. But the other point is that police do get to choose how they implement the law, and I think that's the point that's being made here. So we have a range of offences, drugs offences, which would allow a very different approach to the one we've been hearing about today, had we chosen to go down that line, that would entail the criminalising of large parts of that community who are using drugs, who are involved in the supply of elsewhere. But there's a discretionary and a policing operational decision that our objectives to target the market, to try and disrupt the market, to try and disrupt the enablers of violence, but to try and separate that off, though difficult though that is, from those vulnerabilities and those people who need a public health approach. And you know, I can absolutely reconfirm a commitment to that approach as the BCE commander. And you know, we take heed absolutely in new legislation, but that's not the definition of our policing approach in Hackney.
Okay, thank you. For the initial part, for this part of the meeting, we're going to focus on the local approach and strategic direction, which that encompasses. But also, I've got Councillor Ben Hayhurst with his hand raised.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose three parts to it. Firstly, in terms of, we haven't talked much about the mental health aspect and interlinking. I mean, there was reference there to Mind being a joint programme with Mind and Turning Point. So I'd be interested in sort of hearing more about that interworking and the extent to which people fall into dependency as a consequence or interlinked with mental health issues, and what more work could be done there, and what work is being done. But also from your perspective, if you were given a greater commissioning pot, what would be the next thing you would do as Turning Point? Would it be to have more people on the ground? Would it be going out with police? You know, what would be the next step up from your perspective? A second question was just on the facts and figures of the 15,000 people who've used it, say, once a year, the 4,000 who use it more regularly. Have you got any data on the demographic breakdown of that? E.g., I suppose what I'm getting at is how much of our middle class cohort is driving demand, and that's just an interesting thought process, I suppose, in terms of carrot or stick or communications as to how you try and tackle that. And I suppose the third question is, just hearing this afresh from someone that doesn't sit on this committee, is, you know, the Met Office often comes in for some bad press. You know, it seems to me as if you've got quite a constructive, good story to be telling here about having a staged approach, tackling organised crime, but trying to divert people outside. It would just be an observation that you could possibly do more comms and education around that. and educate people that you're not actually, you're not going to tackle this issue. You know, there will always be drug use. It's how you can manage it in the most sensitive and appropriate way. And broadly, from what I'm hearing, you are doing that. And I think it would probably help you if you upped your comms game a bit, maybe.
So Turning Point going to take that first?
Sure. Owen, do you want to jump in first, or do you want me to?
Maybe if we just chunk that up, Ben, in terms of a response. If you cover the mind bit, Piers, and then I'll just talk a little bit about, in terms of if we had a bit more money, what we would do. Is that okay with you, Ben, as a response? Yeah, brilliant. I mean, the investment that we've been seeing actually over the last couple of years has been really welcome. We know from the Dame Carol Black review there has been quite severe austerity actually within substance misuse, and also all the evidence base that points towards removing money from substance misuse because causes you significant challenges elsewhere, health, criminal justice, and other public services, A&E, for instance. So what we've really been concentrating on with this money is actually recruiting, retaining more people within the workforce, where we've had to kind of make some of the austerity changes has actually been around primarily around staff salaries, and the number of people within the workforce. You know, kind of we have obviously large outgoings on some of our fixed costs, which we struggle to work with. But in terms of what we're trying to do is actually increase people's salaries, make the work more attractive, and bring more people into the profession, and then professionalize the concept of substance misuse work so it's on par with policing, probation, teachers, whereas at the minute I don't think it quite is. So that's really what our primary aim, certainly over this year and next year, is in terms of what we want to see with the investment. The way that that's really going to impact positively on the service user is it will bring down caseloads, so you'll have less people to support when you're going through your talking therapies or your psychosocial interventions and other types of intervention that we want to do. The other thing that we're also struggling with is nursing and clinical team members as a sector, and indeed as a country. You know, there's an awful lot of competition for those posts. And just touching from a strategic point of view on that, we are actually working really closely with ELFT and others in the area on how we can do a bit of job sharing and share some expertise across our various organisations, make the roles more attractive. Within the London Borough of Hackney as well, in the city, is actually we're looking for additional buildings. So we want to be able to have a stepped approach to how people receive their treatment. At the minute, we've got an incredibly busy centre in Mare Street, and we're looking for more properties, and then certainly in the short term plan, that's what we're looking to do.
And I mean, just have you raised that with council officers? About the
I mean, we talk about that with Andrew and Simon, our commissioning partners, all the time. They're supporting with that with us to identify suitable properties as well.
So yeah, I'd agree with everything Owen has just said. Hugely welcome changes coming in, and from the Dame Carol Black report, and the sector has been sort of chronically underinvested in over a decade. So it's hugely welcome to see more money coming in, and for us to be able to recruit more people, and have a bit more freedom with what we're actually able to do within the service in terms of the type of service that we create, the partners we work with, and you know, more places that we can be based to actually engage with the public and try and bring people into treatment. So I suppose your question about mind and how we work with mental health and substance misuse are, you know, are meshed together like this, totally and utterly, and you know, in much the same ways you see very high coincidence of people with mental health problems in prison. You also see an enormous number of people who come in to use our services who also have corresponding mental health issues, and that's a whole range of things, whether it's anxiety and depression or schizophrenia, but we also see a hugely high rate of people with personality disorders, a lot of people on the autistic spectrum, a lot of people with ADHD. You know, most people coming into our service have some kind of issue that means that they have, you know, that they feel unwell, that they are unwell, and that they struggle to adapt to life in society, and drugs and alcohol tends to be the perfect short-term solution for a lot of them. But obviously that then leads to greater and bigger problems further down the line. So that's one of the reasons why we partnered with Mind, and we actually have 11 posts of people who work within the service who are employed by Mind, and they're doing very similar roles to the work that the Turning Point team are doing, but I suppose they're just bringing with them the training that Mind have, and that some of them are focused on more specialist roles, including dual diagnosis. And we also get access to a number of the Mind interventions and Mind groups through them being our partner, which we run for our service users. That being said, I suppose the majority of the work they're doing is for relatively low threshold mental health, and we're actually more partnered on a more frequent basis, I would say, with East London Foundation Trust, who run the mental health team locally, and we have a lot of contact through them, through the neighbourhood teams, through the neighbourhood meetings, through our GP surgeries as well, who are often, sort of the link actually between us and those services. And we do have a consultant psychiatrist who works within the service, who takes a lead with the really complex cases where we're working with dual diagnosis with people with severe and enduring mental health as well as substance misuse. And what we find often actually is that we'd be set to make a referral to the mental health team, but when we discuss the case with them or discuss it in a neighbourhood meeting, they would rather that the case is assessed and evaluated by our own consultant first, because he's a twin expert in mental health and substance misuse, and he is able to diagnose, he is able to prescribe, or he is able to put together a package of suggested medication or care and then pass that back either to the GP or to the mental health team. So he's very involved in all of that work, and I suppose is a key part of the jigsaw. And I think we work well with the mental health services. I think it's as good a partnership as I've seen in all of the boroughs that I've worked in substance misuse. I mean, it could always be better. And I think sometimes we probably do carry a lot of extra work, just because the substance misuse is often the presenting issue or the most obvious issue, and it's a bit harder sometimes to dig under the underlying causes. So I think we could work more closely with them, and I think one of the things we could potentially do with additional funding is to have more specialist dual diagnosis workers. I think we only have one currently in the service who's employed by Mind, and one of the thoughts we did have for a restructure or how we might use additional funding in future is to actually have a dual diagnosis team of workers who could work with the most complex, difficult cases, and to work more closely with the mental health teams and the mental health wards.
Well, thank you very much for that thorough oversight. We've just got Simon who wants to jump in quickly before we move on to Councillor Fajana Thomas, Councillor Conway, and then Councillor Young, and Councillor Garr, but it's in that order. Oh my gosh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Hayhurst, I'll try to answer your three questions as rapidly as possible. In terms of mental health work, Piers has given us a fantastic overview of what's happening operationally on the ground. Just to add that the strategic applications of working in both the fields of substance use and mental health, it is very much about key focuses. In the paper, I detailed the Combating Drugs Partnership. One of the things that we're doing there is trying to make sure that we've got good buy-in from both the Integrated Care Board and the Integrated Care Partnership, so we can discuss co-occurring mental health and substance use as a support need that needs to be worked towards a kind of better outcome for individuals more generally. To kind of emphasise the point that Piers has made already, one of the great things that we've seen coming through from the data is that 70% of individuals who are working with Turning Point with a self-identified mental health support need are receiving some kind of support. Now, as Piers says, that's the kind of individual who's presenting with sort of a lower level mental health support need. It's not the really acute presentations. A recent paper that we presented to the Mental Health Integration Board, again, to try and make sure that we're talking about co-occurring support needs where substance use and mental health are both arising, demonstrated that more pervasive, longer-term, challenging to engage support needs are in need of more kind of input from mental health services. So that's something we're hopefully going to get on the table long term. Discussing again another kind of positive move, we've seen an increase in the number of people who are presenting with opiate use who are accessing treatment. We've gone from a low of 56% of individuals working with our substance use services in the middle of kind of 2021 accessing support to 66% of individuals, which is a real big improvement. In terms of data and demographics related to the estimates of people who are using drugs across the borough, unfortunately there really isn't anything beyond ethnicity and gender at this stage in the game. All of our current stats come from a national survey which is kind of led by central government. It doesn't give us the texture that we realistically want. Again, that's something we're going to try and address with Combating Drugs Partnership and thinking about what data can do for us. In terms of expansions, obviously you asked them directly. From a public health perspective, we want to try and engage the local community more and try and work with more services and more organisations like SWIM, so we can have the voice of people who live in Hackney involved in the strategic direction of tackling substance use, as well as in the operational delivery. And one of the key things that we really need to develop is the role of meaningful activity. It's something which has come up time and again from discussions with individuals with lived experience, but one of the key losses due to austerity is stuff for people to do which keep them away from using drugs, which gives more meaning to their lives. So that's going to be one of our key focuses as well. I hope I answered that fast enough.
Just about. Thank you. I think Councillor Pajana Thompson, you taking us back to the white paper. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's related, but I'll be very quick in regards to Councillor Ruth's question, just to emphasize that within the Hackney Community Safety Partnership strategy and plan, that open drug market and substance misuse is one of the 4 strands of work that is got an action plan attached to it, and the action plan attached to it is actually, while public health is leading on that, is around reducing harm, around targeting hotspot and engaging with people who might be using, vulnerable people who are using, as well as targeting or the people who are selling to them. Just to reiterate that a lot of our focus is actually targeting the market rather than targeting vulnerable people who are users. Thanks, I'll stop there, conscious of time.
Thank you so much, Councillor. Okay, we've got Councillor Conway next. Thank you. Thank you, everybody who's responded so far.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for the police. I know that this item is primarily focused on adults, but I just wondered if the police could outline the approaches taken to the policing of drug use and possession relating to children and young people in the borough, quite specifically whether any such incidents relating to children and young people whether they always result in Merlin reports being made, and if so, what RAG rating is used for these types of incidences. And it's just for context, really. I'm asking this question, I suppose, in light of Child Q and the attention that had for a lot of us last year, in terms of us recognising there being a challenge within the police locally, quite specifically, in making that differentiation between criminalising and taking criminalising young people or taking a safeguarding approach response to addressing these issues. So I'm just wondering if that can be sort of highlighted in part by detailing the response to children and young people, please.
Sure. Do you want to cover off how we approach ADA and young people? And I assume by when you talk about young people in possession of drugs, you want to understand the response that the police deliver in those circumstances. And I can maybe talk to a little bit of what's come out of Child Q and the Merlin aspect.
Yes, please.
So the response is absolutely. The response is absolutely to treat that person as a child first and foremost. We are ensuring that we are training officers to ensure they recognise substance misuse needs, ensuring that those safeguarding referrals go into our partners, and we're looking at those first and foremost. Many of the children obviously will be probably offered some sort of triage or a community resolution through the youth offending team. We are in liaison with the youth offending team, policing colleagues within those teams, to make sure that they identify misuse and obviously put on the relevant safeguarding referrals into child social care. So that's our approach for it in a nutshell.
And I suppose just picking up that on a wider aspect is obviously some of the children that we do come into contact with aren't just dealing with for possession, if we're being honest. There is a level to that. And I mean, I run the public protection unit, and even if we are getting children, we've got intelligence that they are running sort of county lines, London lines, and are involved in drug supply. The premise that we've got and the way that we are working now is very much a focus on understanding the child being a victim of being groomed into criminal activity. And that's the approach we will take. We'll do everything we can to get the evidence surrounding the crime that they're perpetrating for people who are grooming those children, trafficking them in whatever way, or getting criminally exploiting them. And we'll do everything we can to put them behind bars. The approach sometimes is dependent on whether or not we get the information from the child, if that makes sense. So it's saying, by example, we stop a child in the street that's got 200 rocks of crack. They're clearly being exploited. Someone's making them deal drugs if they're 14 or 15. But if we get nothing from them and there's no intelligence picture surrounding that, we still might have to deal with them through a criminal justice route. But then there is discretion within the outcome, if that makes sense. So that we're hoping that we're not looking to prosecute kids to get them into prison if they're genuine victims of crime. So I think it's, as Sean alludes to the point, every child that gets arrested for drugs or in supply of drugs in serious cases will have a strategy meeting and a strategy response wrapped around them. That's council partnership approach, which is trauma informed. It looks at diversion. It looks at all that stuff around them. Obviously, if we're getting into lower levels of possession of drugs, child gets stopped with a wrap of cannabis on them, the referral will get made. It's very important that partners at schools, parents, etc., inform that but that will have a lower level of response and wraparounds. I'm sure you can understand that. But the point is that yes, it's trauma informed. It's through a child lens. We do everything we can not to criminalise children. Is the approach that we're taking. And if you've got specific questions around childcare, I'm happy to take those offline. But yeah, does that answer your question or help? Do you want to come back?
Yeah, it does. I just wondered if you could address specifically the question around the Merlin reports. Are they made in relation to every child? And also, what is the RAG rating? Because I know that that was flagged as one of the issues in relation to child Q, and whether that, if you could indicate what the RAG rating would be for a Merlin report relating to a child in possession or found to have been misusing substances.
Any child police contact doesn't necessarily have to be in a criminal context. It could be in a safeguarding context. We'll have a Merlin report put on about them. Just to explain, there's no RAG rating on a Merlin. What the Merlin should do is document the circumstances, that the situation that they're found in, an element of research from an officer who's found them in those circumstances. They'll look at their back history, search systems, and depending on what they're asked for, the point of a Merlin is to point them into the direction of partners with a specific request. So if we've stopped a child with, say, cannabis on them, we might just be informing partners and informing the schools, if that makes sense, so that the school can maybe pick it up the next day. If it's something more serious, we might be saying this child needs social service contact, trauma-informed care, counselling or whatever. So I think the point of the Merlin is a referral with a specific request from the police to services, if that makes sense. There's not RAG rating as such. It's if there's serious circumstances, we would be looking for the officer to ask for more services to be wrapped around that child. So they're tailored and they should be very specific to the circumstances that the child's found in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We've got Councillor Young and then Councillor Garbutt.
Cool. Thank you for all of that. I've just wanted to push on a bit on the sort of different ways in which there's joint working going on. But I've got 3 bits to it, so you can sort of pick up on whichever bit makes most sense to you. One of the things that I've noticed as a ward councillor, I'm a ward councillor in the north of the borough in Woodbury Down, is that we saw some really good detached outreach work being done for which the funding, I think, has gone, and so it's stopped. But what was interesting about that detached outreach was that it was about people going out from the youth centres actually to find young people where they were. So rather than waiting for people to come into a service, again, finding them where they were, and often it was triggered by there would be young people maybe smoking cannabis in a stairwell that would be reported, and then the detached outreach would kind of go and see, well, okay, who are these kids? What do they need? If they're referrals, how do we do that? I'd be interested to know how those sorts of really interesting kind of proactive services are continuing now, and whether we're desperately seeking more funding for that sort of work, or whether we just say, well, cuts are cuts. The next bit is about kind of ensuring that coordination between police and children's services. So, we've heard a bit about mental health coordination across with the police. I see, and everybody, I'm sure, sees cases where you've got combination of, you've got domestic violence, you've got housing problems, you've got drug-related problems, you've got mental health problems. All of these things are crowded into a single, if not person, family. How are we ensuring that all of those services are being kind of brought in, but not just there's a referral to the other bit? So, oh, this person's got a mental health problem. Have we ticked the box and sent an email to but what are we then doing to follow through on that to make sure that that work continues? So the example that you gave about the Merlins is interesting in that, because we've certainly seen cases in my ward where Merlin referral hasn't been made. So there must be some kind of level that they have to hit before that happens, or some sort of checking to check that it does happen. And then the last bit is, actually no, leave that. That's enough.
I can attempt to cover those first two. Well, they are two questions. So in terms of detached outreach, I'm not sure what service was delivering the outreach that you referred to, but we do have other services who are delivering detached outreach. As I mentioned in the presentation, Turning Point, and in particular the criminal justice team, have been delivering an outreach function. The amount of outreach that they've been delivering has increased 300% since we started, meeting upwards of 100 individuals every single month on an outreach basis. SWIM are also conducting outreach on behalf of us, again to try and critically engage with individuals of various demographics. Again, they're visiting a huge number of individuals every single month. In terms of things like youth centres, Young Hackney, which is our specialist service which delivers interventions for young people who are using drugs, and that includes children, are working with youth centres, are working with local schools, and are working with the criminal justice teams really kind of regularly, and making sure that those referrals are coming through and that individuals and children are being met where they are. In terms of ensuring coordination between services and making sure that there's a good proactive joint approach to vulnerability, one of the things that we brought in with ADA is a specific case coordinator who is based in Hackney. They are a Hackney employee. They coordinate a number of multi-agency case reviews, both in terms of looking at a higher volume of individuals who are coming to the attention of treatment services, as well as the police and the probation teams. The idea being that joint coordinated approaches to casework can be put in place. That coordinator then also chairs individual meetings where that needs to happen, and they follow up the casework as well to make sure approach to ensuring that somebody receives the support that they need to stay happy, healthy, and well. We've got an awful lot of good examples of where that's been really effective, particularly when we're thinking about things like cuckooing, so where somebody's house has been taken away to be used to deal drugs. We've had great results. People be housed. We've had really good, positive joint approaches with plainclothes officers and workers from Turning Point visiting houses to make sure that people feel safe and contained by the approach, and things are going generally well. In terms of continuing that work, we are hopeful that the substance misuse grant, which was announced as part of the 10-year drug strategy, is going to help us continue to fund that intervention and other interventions to make sure we can keep doing what we want to do and what we know works for people. We are waiting on determination from central government around that. So we can't say for certain that that's definitely going to happen, but it's our hope at this junction.
Let's follow up.
Go on quickly.
Be really good to hear from Swim and or Turning Point about how you find that sort of keying into the other services in the borough when you're working with someone. How easy or difficult do you find it to get those other bits of their lives help and supported?
Would you like to comment now? I think it's probably, I mean, I've had a 16-year history of working in substance misuse and criminal justice services, where of course partnership working is a critical component. I think this is the best version of it that I've seen. This is a real fact born out of experience. I think on the whole, right, key partnerships. So when I talk about that, I talk about primary partnerships like the police, like probation, like the drug and alcohol providers are very strong and are working really well. You can always have more resources to help improve that. But I think the fundamental structures that we have in Hackney and the personal relationships we have and the trust, I think we've gone a long way to building really genuine, authentic partnerships and a desire to have a shared outcome more than I've ever seen. I think there are very clear issues around, I would say primarily, as I said, resources within other partner organisations. What you tend to find is, what I found is organisations like Swim, and I'm sure it's the same with Turning Point, because we tend to go over and above, what happens is we quite often stray into other areas. Other services are under-resourced in those areas. Our clients then get dependent on us because we produce results. And so therefore the stresses then start to come on our services, and other services are not able to discharge their duties because of the problems they're experiencing. So resources, I find, is a big problem. Recruitment has already been alluded to, massive one. You know, and particularly I think when you're trying to recruit people with substantial lived and professional experience, you're trying to bring that on board to strengthen the multi-agency working. That's proving to be a real pinch point. So for me, resources, recruitment are probably the difficulties that we're really witnessing at the moment the most.
Okay. Sorry, I still can't.
Just to quickly add to that from the council aspect, while organization like Turning Point and Swim are working closely all with adults, with the council, we've got two services, Mentivation and St. Giles that work. St. Giles work on a one-to-one with a lot of young people. Why it's not focusing around drug, it's about it's holistic on what's mostly people that might have affiliation to gangs, which in most cases we have a level of drugs activities within that, and we have Mentivation that linked with Young Hackney. Simon is mentioned Young Hackney, or identify schools, either secondary, primary school, and like a 6-8 weeks program with them around concern with young people.
Thank you, Councillor John Thomas. Oh.
Just very quickly, I just wanted to make sure we hadn't left a wrong impression on some of the things we talked about earlier, because you came back to the Merlin referrals point. So it's very definitely not the notion that policing encounters an issue, puts onto a Merlin, it's some sort of a fire and forgetting to others to go and deal with. So that's the starting point. That's the frontline officers in whatever guise they've been in, or whether it's in an operation encountering that issue. But that receipt of that Merlin is again into a multi-agency environment that police are involved in, along with social services, housing, and a whole range of other providers. So you know that problem, that issue, you know, is not being passed between agencies. It's being referred from numerous individual parties who might first encounter it into that multi-agency environment, whether it's in a MASH or whatever sort of forum we're dealing with. And I just want to make sure we haven't left a wrong impression.
And sort of just to reassure you, you could specifically talk about the partnerships that we have and how we we deal with stuff. You described a situation which seemed to be the worst nightmare that you'd have: domestic drugs, mental health, everything put together. I suppose my answer to that is dependent on the primary issue. If it's domestic violence, it might go into the MARAC side of stuff. If it's it might go there, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't deal with all the problems. Like we've got our integrated offender management. Depending, there's so many of the gangs sort of work that we do in partnership. So what I'd say is, the boss is right, the referral is the beginning, and that's only one mechanism that we get referral in. Obviously we get referrals in from our LADOs, referrals in from our schools. So there's different mechanisms to come in. It's reviewed, it's looked at, intelligence is looked at, the issue is looked at, and then it goes to the relevant part of policing, depending on the primary issue or the most significant issue.
Oh, thank you. I can see Piers has got his hand raised there. Can I please ask you to keep it as brief as possible so we can move on to getting as many questions as possible?
It was just one thing very briefly to second what Peter said about his experience of running a service in the borough. I think that the partnership working in Hackney is really strong, actually, for a drug and alcohol service. Obviously, I came into it new a year ago. I was surprised at the depth and range of the partnerships that the services involved in and the engagement from other services. I think we've got more work to do to engage with the probation service locally, but I think otherwise all of the other partnerships I think are very, very strong. So I do think that is something that's working well in this part of the health and social care sector in Hackney.
Thank you, Piers. Moving on to Councillor Garbutt and then Councillor Joseph.
Thank you. Thanks for all your presentations. It's been really good to hear of the public health approach. I wanted to touch a bit on how I felt reading the slides from the police. It felt almost like kind of two stories, almost like the really good approach at the beginning and then the kind of quite harsh statistics around the use of Section 60s and disproportionate use of stop and search. So my question's about Met Commissioner Mark Rowley's has said that the powers of stop and search have been overused and misused. So I wondered if you could explain a bit about how you're reviewing the use and planning to use these powers less, and related to that, what you're doing in Hackney to ensure that young people feel confident in their interactions with the police.
Yeah, I'll start, but I might, as I say, I might need to lean on to Holly's got a wider experience on the borough. So, I mean, Mark Rowley's right, and stop and search has been a perennially difficult issue for policing. We know that solely as a power, the long-term use of stop and search doesn't reduce crime, but we also know it's an effective tool for mitigating short-term challenges like escalations of violence. The challenge has been the point you precisely sort of make around the proportionality and effectiveness of that use. So we maximise the effective use in the short term. We don't create long-term damage and distrust within the communities. I mean, what's really interesting preparing to come into this role over the last couple of weeks, looking across the stats, probably in a similar way to you having those packs, I really noted, firstly, is the significant reduction in the use of stop and search on Hackney over the last 2 years. I think we're going down from around 851 searches per month at the start of 2021. Latest figures for December were that was down to about 335 per month, so a significant reduction. But what we have seen is an absolute maintenance of the positive outcomes of stop and search. So a far lower use of the power, but equally managing the effectiveness. So, i.e., that net doesn't have to be thrown as wide as we perhaps used to be doing in order to achieve those same short-term outcomes. Now, very, very difficult to point to to identify single factors amongst a range that have led to that. I think a lot of soul searching and consideration about proportionality and additional training, particularly after child queue, I think has definitely played a part in that, and that's a positive element, a positive outcome of that story. I also think, certainly it's a professional sense, I haven't got evidence to back this, but a professional sense that the intelligence that we generate through ADA, the deeper understanding of the drugs market we've got in the borough, and the better understanding of our on-street intelligence allows our officers to make much more targeted use of stop and search. And when you listen to what Sir Mark says, that's precisely the orientation he wants to take the Met towards. It is a power that has its uses. It's a power that can also be very damaging if misused. So what we want to do is maximise all the facets, all of our intelligence tools to make sure we're using that power as effectively as we can, as proportionately as we can, and therefore in as limited ways whilst still achieving those outcomes. It's a journey that continues. I mean, we draw on you and the community to help us in that. Oversight's critical here. Achieving that balance between effectiveness and overuse requires a voice from the community. So, I'm really pleased to see the work that's gone into the police encounter panels and other elements that have been set up. Again, child queue is something of a jolt for us in terms of fast forwarding some of this development, but I think we're in a space now where some of those aspects are coming to fruition, and again, that's only a positive. The police need to be policed, and we need to be, we need to be helped on that journey to achieve that fine balance that I talked about. Dan, if there is anything, feel free to fill in any detail around.
I think the boss has hit every point there. It's about using it correctly. It's about using it in a timely way when we have serious violence and incidents, but it's just not a sporadic palette. We should be casting a net far and wide. So I think we're starting to get the balance better. I do worry. I think it's a legitimate tool to prevent violence and keep our children safe. And if you look in the case of child queue, which isn't a normal search out of coat, jacket and gloves you'd see in the streets, obviously went a lot further than that. But those strip searches, we haven't done a single strip search in Hackney on a child outside of custody since child queue. Now, within that, there will be serious violence, weapons, drugs, and there is a risk for that. There was 19 strip searches on children outside of custody the year before child queue. That doesn't sound like a lot, and actually, you can take the view that we can forgive those 19, not do them at all. Would that save a life? Would that stop violence? Maybe, maybe not. But when you amplify that across London, and there's 200 or 300 of those searches, that you've probably saved a life in there somewhere. So it does concern me that if we haven't got the confidence to use the powers, and that's an issue, it's not just that we're just using the intelligence correctly, that could cause risk and could cause harm to our young people. So I just think we need to be aware as a group and as a partnership that actually it is useful, but it's got to be used in the right way, like the boss has said. But we don't want to ever get into a position where the police don't use the tactics for lack of confidence or through criticism, because that could put children and adults to risk. And I think, look, we've had a 65% reduction this year on homicide in Hackney. We've got the biggest reduction in homicide, both domestic and street-based homicide in Hackney. I'm not saying stop and search plays a part in all of that. There's loads of the Yamatar work that we've done, where you look at all the people we've locked up for drugs, trafficking and supply. 80% of those people are high harm offenders who have got previous weapons and violence offences. So our homicide rates come down because of that, but it's a mixture of tactics and a mixture of focus that has brought our most serious violence down, and stop and search does play a part in the carriage of weapons. So I think
I think we all understand, the approach in respect to stop and search, but the disproportionality, particularly in respect of Black young men, is incredibly problematic in terms of confidence levels across the community. And I think more so when you see the outcomes, the statistics, the numbers of people stopped, the numbers of people subsequently arrested or further action taken, they don't marry. And it does seem that this community is still being over-policed. And we understand, there's connection in respect of county lines and gangs and so forth. But within that, the people who are caught up inadvertently in stop and searches is incredibly worrying, because that hasn't satiated as yet in terms of the data that's been provided by you.
Yeah, and there was definitely more for us to understand about the disproportionality point. It would be difficult to comment, because I don't think we fully have understood some of the long-term causes around why we've got a disproportionality, and there'd be a degree of speculation, and which I don't think it'd be helpful for this group for us to air. I think there is a point around a trajectory which I think we've made, that there is it's not just a small percentage reduction, a significant reduction in the use of the tool over the past 2 years, but a maintenance of those positive results, and which is in fact an increase. It grew by 2% in this last year of positive outcomes. So we're stopping a lot less. We've got an increase in positive outcomes. It's 30%. That means 70% of people don't have anything on them and yet they've been stopped. And I agree that's a significant significant part of our community that's been stopped, searched, and there wasn't a positive outcome. There wasn't a reason. There was a reason for us to stop and search, but there wasn't an outcome that emerged from that. There is a public debate, I think, about the price and the balance between that activity and crime reduction and violence reduction that needs to happen. It's not just a policing debate. Our powers and our use and powers are shaped by that public dialogue and by that public discussion. As Dan says, the power is powerful for us and is useful for us and is useful for reducing short-term violence, and we should be continuing to use it. What we should be doing alongside that is seeking to improve the efficiency where we can, and yeah, I'd add it as a third wing to that, understanding and trying to improve why that disproportionality is, as it is. It's interesting because in our sister borough in Tower Hamlets, it's a very different proportionality story. So some further work for us to understand why there's that difference between the two boroughs, in addition to why we've got disproportionality between groups on Hackney.
Thank you very much. Did you have another?
I'll make just a quick.
Oh, so it's still on.
Oh, yeah, and I think you've hit the root of the court, like the issue, isn't it? That it's all about the reasons for stop and search and taking that safeguarding approach first. Like that is, and it's really good to hear you saying that you're going to look into that, because I think that's the bit that, is the reassuring bit about the young people, well, it's particularly young people's experiences. And just to pick up on something you did say there was a consideration around disproportionality and learning from Child Q, but I think in the notes it said that there was no drop in stop and searches carried out after Child Q. I just wondered why that was a statement, and if you had expected a drop.
Different searches. I think it's right. Stop and search. I think if you're talking to the public, stop and search would be a search of any child, or more thorough, intimate part search.
Right. Okay.
As opposed to a street search, which limits you to out jacket and gloves, basically. So you're not allowed to start taking clothing off in public view. So what I was saying there, we've had no MTL searches, strict searches of young people in Hackney, since Child Q outside of custody. And all I was trying to make the point was that in the same way that stop and search has dropped, we just have to be, after the point was made, to expect. But to reassure you, we have got the youth scrutiny panels. We're bringing youth into our work. I know on the Tower Hamlets side it's looking to be mirrored. We've got young scrutineers, young people from the community coming into the council, working with the council and police on all manner of topics, everything from online safety to stop and search. And I just think our approach has just got to be more community informed. We've got to get more people involved and hold us to account. I think we've moved on a hell of a lot. In the 20 years that I've been in policing, we've got body-worn cameras, we've got electronic nodes, stop and search thing. There's talks here about the QR codes on the back of stop search slips, which are immediately scanned on the back of the thing. The young people can scan that QR code and it goes straight to the websites with their rights, their entitlements, stop search groups, local charities, people who can inform them of their rights, talk to them about what's happened. So there is loads of work that's going on to try and improve the experience if that stop and search has to take place.
98% of our stop and search have been captured on body-worn video, which compared to the rest of the Met is a very, very high figure. So in terms of scrutiny and accountability, yes, it hasn't resolved some of those underlying issues that we're discussing here, but I mean, the journey towards that definitely starts with that accountability.
Thank you. Councillor Joseph.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone that's contributed so far. I do feel somewhat reassured by the discussion around the safeguarding of young people and seeing them as victims rather than primarily as first and foremost as criminals. But early on in the discussion, some of our police guests mentioned that really it would be down to, say, if a young person was stopped for drugs, then passing on information. And actually, I just wanted to sort of highlight how difficult that can be for a young person, and how I think it's very important that we see people in the context of their environments and of where they're living, and of the fact that any exploitation is quite likely to be on their estate or in the immediate area in which they live. And as I'm sure people will know where their families live, and people's ability to move, especially working class people, poor people, is really very limited. And that's been highlighted recently by the Abraham Badru case, which is obviously not drugs related. It was to do with a sexual assault, but he was a witness. And I mean, I don't know the full details of the case, but it sounds like he was failed in terms of he had to keep living in that community where he was known, and the fact that he had grasp was known as well. And I just feel like what has been learned from that And obviously we are the Living in Hackney Scrutiny Commission, so we think a lot about housing and the fact that we just don't have any social housing, not enough being built, and the impact that that has then on people having to remain in places where they've perhaps been exploited or had these really negative experiences. I mean, how can you speak out as a young child, you know, when you've got someone watching your mum from across the stairway? So I just wondered, in terms of housing, you know, how is that kind of, how do you work now with councils? Do you think it would be easier for a young person to inform on their neighbours and to be moved successfully? And also just to bring in Swim, I noticed that you had said one of the things you like to support people with was housing options. And I just wondered what those housing options were in your opinion, because place is so central to, you know, people's habits changing or people feeling that they can talk out about their exploitation. So it was a bit long-winded, but I'd appreciate your your thoughts there.
I think, yeah, I mean, you hit a really important nail on the head. And I think it goes back to some of the points made very early on about that relationship between social issues and drug use in the first instance. You see exactly the same between social issues and vulnerabilities as well. Yeah, a product of circumstance, product of place, etc. And certainly where we hit the more extreme examples of exploitation, of course, relocation is a really important tool, and often that's the only way of really removing the child from a dangerous situation, is getting the whole family out of that environment. But that's, you know, sadly, not just in policing terms, but across the whole partnership, the resources available mean that tends to be reserved for the most extreme cases. There is good working between housing and policing, and in a lot of those multi-agency environments where there's a MASH or in safeguarding the married, when we're looking at domestic violence, safeguarding domestic violence abuse victims, again, housing are present, and, you know, we'll draw on their expertise and ability to put moves in place and to achieve some change if they can, but we accept the limitations of wider parts of the partnership. You know, the local authorities aren't able to necessarily move and rehouse at the volumes that might meet the need, and that's one of the realities. So I think it's therefore looking at the, you know, what additional measures can be wrapped around, whether it's through education or other options which just try and change the environment that child or that vulnerable person is operating within.
Yeah, going back to your sort of point about getting information from young people, it's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because if I stop a young child out at 6 o'clock at night and I do a drug search on them for possession of cannabis, and they don't want to give me their name, I've got no power or ability to get that name off them. Now, I've got considerations then as a police officer as to whether or not that child's in immediate or significant danger under the Child Protection Act, to be able to take them back to their parents. But let's be frank, 15 and 16-year-old out at 6 o'clock at night who's with their friends isn't in immediate risk of serious risk of, so you're going to leave them where they are. And so getting information from young people is really difficult if they don't want to speak to the police. I think the boss talks to the extreme cases, and I think where we're getting better is, for example, we see a young child who's missing or has a number of missing episodes from home, that debrief element, that sitting them down, it's not just taking them back in the back of a car, it's bringing them back to a police station, maybe even considering a video recorded interview, like a VRR of a child victim, and getting an expert to draw information from them to find out where they've been, to try and understand what's on their phone, who's exploiting them. But you've got to use legal powers. And if someone doesn't want to speak, and that's where the partner agencies, the partnership is so important, because the referral goes in, we might have hit a blocker, but it's about the other agencies coming into play, education, schools, social services, to then go back and revisit the day, the weeks after, and speak to them again. So look, I'm not pretending it's easy. I just think working in partnership, you've got a good partnership, more than one opportunity to speak to that young person or get the information from that young person. And that's what it's about, is getting all the information together from the different agencies to give the full picture. So I suppose it's a difficult one, it's hard. There's no easy answers.
So this is why the trust and confidence piece is just so critical for us. You know, so we're not trying to do something to the communities here to manage the drugs and the wider problems. We're trying to work with communities to do that. So, you know, the best outcome is that there's sufficient trust between police, the communities, and the different agencies involved. The communities are working with us to make that estate a hostile environment for those drug gangs, not a hostile environment for those vulnerable exploited people. Now, you know, it's easy to quickly make that sort of statement in a room like this. A very difficult thing to translate that to the ground. And the starting point of that is that trust and confidence we build up with the community, but also across the partnership with them.
We've recognised young people are really difficult. That's why we put our primary schools officer in place. It's one officer for the BCU, but it's a conduit. I've been able to speak to a local head teacher this week, Paul Jackson, and it is concerns around the safeguarding of children and the gap between us and the police. So look, we are trying, if we can get police officers in and around young people, give them confidence that we're not, the big bad wolf type scenario, that they can talk to us, they can trust us. Maybe we start breaking down those barriers that when we stop them on the street a bit later on in life, they'll have had contact with the police, positive contact, and they might be able to start giving us a bit more information. But it's a really difficult thing, isn't it? We're not going to get this overnight. We've got to work at it and keep going.
Thank you. We've got Penny Root, also Councillor Root, sorry.
It's all right. I don't mind being called Penny. Thank you. I just wanted to highlight one of the figures that I just found extraordinarily shocking, actually, in the documents that we had, which I thought was perhaps a misprint. It said 68% of Section 60 stop and searches in the Metropolitan Police area are in Hackney. 68%. That's a huge figure in one borough. I'm guessing from what we've heard that the explanation for that would be that that number of Section 60s had been put in place because the police considered that there was a danger to life, and that you therefore put those Section 60s in place in an attempt to save lives. The problem is that we've got no way of knowing whether or not that actually has the effect. And in any case, I suppose what I want to do really is to highlight the negative side of the stop and searches when they don't work. The same document also says that 13.8% of stop and searches lead to an arrest. Well, if you read that in a different way, that means 6 out of 7 stop and searches don't lead to an arrest. And in practical terms, when we talk about gaining the trust of young people, that means that it's likely that 6 out of 7 stop and searches are undermining the confidence and trust in the police that young people have. So that idea about them coming forward with information, etc., becomes less likely with those more increases of stop and searches. Now, I know that there's a scrutiny panel which examines every Section 60 which is put into place. And my question really is, how representative of Hackney communities is that scrutiny panel? And also, you also in the same document talk about police encounter panels, and I'd like to know who's on those encounter panels and how you recruit those people from the local community. And just finally, I know that the police are under a lot of financial stress, but I also sadly know that as with so many areas of public life, when service delivery is under pressure, then public engagement is one of the first things which loses its budget. So I wondered how you're thinking of maintaining a reasonable allocation of funds for these police encounter panels so that they can actually do the job of trying to engage the community more and give you some thoroughgoing feedback from real people as we go forward.
There's a few questions there. Try and get through and pick them off. I think it probably is a misprint, and that's a BCU figure, the 68. I will have to come back to you and give you the details. I do not see over 1 a week. I can't remember the last Section 60 for at least 4 or 5 weeks on Hackney. So 68, you're looking at, I think the BCU for a start. So I think that is a misprint. So apologies there. I think they do. You can tangibly see the difference in when it's a Section 60 is if we've had a stabbing or a shooting or serious violence, which is when we put them in, or a number of incidents, and we've got the intelligence that it's maybe involving our gangs, and we think there's going to be retaliation. There is good evidence to see that after an incident you'll get the retaliation. And when we have the Section 60s in and we get a good amount of officers into the area where we think that violence is going to take place, it is a prevention tool. It does work. It's a hard one to win over the public. Again, it goes back almost to the stop and search. It's a tool that's there. We've got to carefully use it. Every single one is with engagement with our partners. We do speak to our AGs. We do speak to our wall panel chairs. We do inform them that they're going in, we get their feedback, and we have to feedback the results, as in what they've achieved, how many stops have been made, whether we found anything, whether there's been any further violence. It does also have commander oversight. Centrally, higher ranks look at it in the Met, albeit the authority has been rescinded back to inspector level within the Met. We do have oversight at commander level, which is unusual compared to other places in the UK. So look, it's a really intrusive power. It's a really difficult one, but I think because of the level of violence, and I go back to my previous point, actually we've put a lot in over the last year over the BCU, but our homicide rate has dropped by 65%. Our street violence has dropped. Our robbery has dropped by 4%. We're the only borough or BCU in the Met that's got a reduction in street robbery. Every single other one's gone up. One of the BCUs, I think Westminster's got a 65% increase in street robbery. So look, I could sit here and quote figures, probably meaningless, but I do think they work, and it's the same as stop and search, proportionately, in the right circumstances, well scrutinised, and accountable, open, that we're putting them in. We're always a partnership message. We always literally send a message out to every single partner. That's all our IAG chairs, our council partners, our chief exec, everyone, when we put one in, and they're able to feed back to us there and then and give us that thought, as well as verbal communication on the phone to some of our partners. So we do take them really seriously. We do consider them before we put them in, and it's not just one piece of violence, it's multiple episodes of violence have occurred. Very rarely would we put one in just because we've seen one stabbing. We start to see a pattern of behaviour in an area. They are very postcodal, very geographical, and we've tried to improve. I hope that reassures you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. What we certainly have.
Sorry, I was trying to ask a bit more about the scrutiny and the involvement.
Yeah, I was just going to come and look. So I think you made. I think your point, but correct me if I've misunderstood this, was broadly, at the time of reducing resources, are we going to see a reduction in that amount of scrutiny, and what commitments can we give? I think resources are challenging. We feel that we're going into another period of very challenging resource constraint. But what we're seeing on Hackney is a growth of those scrutiny environments. I mean, yes, as I said, some of it prompted, and it shouldn't have been, but it was effectively prompted by the Child Q case, looking at those police encounter panels and other areas. So, I mean, it's certainly an area we're resolutely committed to supporting. We will have to get back to you with the exact composition of some of the groups. I'm afraid with sort of 10 or 11 hours on the borough, I've not quite got to the level of understanding that I can quote off the membership of all the panels yet. But if we can write back to you with composition, that might answer those questions.
Would it also be possible to have not just the composition of who's on it, but what the criteria are and how long people are on those panels for?
Yeah, we'll give you a summarised outline of how they've selected and that process. Yeah.
Thanks.
So, just quickly to comment, Councillor Root, this is the Section 60 review panel. This is one of the areas that, in partnership, I agree with the Borough Commander to put in 2021. As Dan mentioned, this is an Hackney thing. It doesn't happen or BCU thing in all the other boroughs. They're quite, the composition is quite small because what they discuss are quite technical in terms of what they've done. There is a community representative there. There is the chair of IAG. And on the council, our partnership community safety manager, Maurice Basin, as well as Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got a quick one and then possibly time for one more. Mine's in respect of the material benefits of having a project such as SWIM and how that relates more broadly to the ADA kind of perspective of things, particularly in respect of efficacy. I think a more kind of coordinated approach to dealing with specific groups, whether it's women or sex workers or young people or vulnerable people or people with mental health kind of condition, issues, I should say, is probably the best way to go. But not being aware of how these manifest within ADA, I think I'd be interested to hear about that. But likewise, what you feel the benefits specifically are that you're seeing the kind of tangible material benefits of having a kind of scheme like SWIM in operation in our borough are, and how that relates to the kind of wider working patterns.
I think if I was to really distill things down to its really simplest level, I think visual representation in a diverse borough like Hackney is critical. People need and are much more confident when they see people who look like them. And I know we talk about this a lot, and we've been talking about this for years, you know, about diversity and so forth. Our experience is when you have a professional outfit which is respected by partners, people feel that. This is not even an academic thing. What we've found is having a real life organisation, and I think the other component about this, and particularly organisations like Swim, is when you have a service like us, which is really open, which means quite often what happens is we sit in our office, working out of our office in Dalston, a client walks past and actually walks straight in. Right, they walk straight in and they get responded to immediately. Right, now it's a simple thing, but what we've found is when people don't have, when you get that moment, that window of opportunity, somebody's got a real life situation, they feel like doing something about it, they're on the edge, they can go and talk to someone immediately, and most importantly, I think, for organisations like Swim, is people can bring their whole self. So they don't just bring a component of themselves and have to leave everything out the door. You know, if it's to do with their housing, or if it's to do with their substance misuse or family, they bring all of themselves. And what that does is it encourages people to come back. It encourages people to use the service. They don't have that period where they want to do something, but then they get told, you got an assessment in 6 weeks' time. Well, you've lost them. You know, so the critical, and I think our success as a delivery partner has been the fact, and I think our colleagues will absolutely back this up. Clients get a responsive service. It's about response, it's about immediacy, it's about being agile. These are the critical things that we've found that has made our part within this wider partnership really, really effective.
All right. So 100% agree with Peter. I think there's one aspect during ADA which we've not really spoken about today, is we utilised something called Good Lives Model Training, which was delivered to various different partners, Turning Point, Probation, Adult Social Care, Swim, I think you attended. And the notion of that training was thinking about individuals as they present as their whole selves, to make sure that whatever response they received integrated who they were, integrated their identity into their treatment and their recovery and their movement forwards. And I think that's been really beneficial. We've seen the benefits with Swim there, we've seen the benefits with St Giles, we've seen the benefits with Turning Point, and it's something that we are committed to continuing with all of our commission services already. In terms of, I think, getting to the crux of the conversation, of your question, which is the notion of diversity, the notion of equality, the notion of how people present differently in one environment. We're really committed to making sure that we've got diversity in service. So yes, it moves beyond Swim to think about other ethnicities. It moves beyond ethnicities to think about gender, to think about age, to think about all of the different aspects of us as a population, which we need to think about when we are trying to work with people through a space where they are able to lead happy, healthy, fulfilled lives. We're trying to strategically engage in thinking about how we can do that more definitively. That's a big part of our combating drugs partnership. As Sean referenced earlier, that's something we set up. There's going to be a number of different quantities working there. I think the other aspect, and I sort of referred to it earlier, is making sure that we are reflecting the views of individuals who live within the borough. So we set up a lived experience forum, which talks to individuals who use drugs on a quarterly basis, to try and get their understanding of what the treatment system looks like now, and to understand whether that meets their needs. And again, it's utilising those views, utilising that space as a scrutiny for the work that we're undertaking, which will help enable us to make sure we've got the right services, we're commissioning the right services, and we're helping to develop the right services to make sure that the diverse community that we do see presenting in Hackney is thought about in our treatment system. Ultimately, that will probably come with more services. We already do an awful lot of work with London Friend around LGBT work. We do a lot of work with the Pause Project when thinking about women, but we want to expand that.
So is it just all down to money then, really? Is that all? So Kathy, that's what I'm saying then, really.
I think an aspect of it is money, and again, we can't comment too much on money at this juncture because we haven't yet received a determination from the central government around the drug strategy grant we should receive. Some of it is also about coordination. Some of it is also about making sure that we've properly engaged with other community providers and other services that are delivering across Hackney. And again, that's something that we really want to provide with the Combat Partnership, making sure that we've got as many partners around the table as possible, making sure that we've got a good strategy that points us towards Hackney, which is better for the diverse community that we see, particularly when they're utilising drugs, and we need to keep them happy, safe, well, and living into a fulfilled life.
Okay, we're going to go to Councillor Ogundumoren. Sorry, he hasn't asked questions yet. We can move quickly to Councillor Garden. Sorry.
Hopefully it's working. Oh, okay, it's not. Yeah, so hi. Yeah, thanks for all the response. Gone off again.
You can just mark.
Let's try again.
Yeah,
it's not working. I'll just try and speak loud. So yeah, thank you for your responses so far. I think we touched on this briefly, but I don't think the response was detailed enough, so I thought I'll ask it. So a common complaint amongst minority communities, especially those in Hackney, is that the middle class residents are seen taking drugs, but are not put under the same searching tactics as minority communities. So I guess the question is, what is the BCU doing to ensure this is not the case, and our searching is done proportionately, but then also that is this visible and being communicated to the public?
In answer to the last question, we'll go in reverse. Probably not, in fairness. I'm not so sure it necessarily is being communicated to the public. I think it's a difficult one, isn't it? When we're searching people who are openly on the street, believed to be in a stairwell smoking cannabis or dealing, that's quite overt. The aspect I would say when we talk about working class people, the recreational side, we then have to go to our nighttime economy focus and how we're looking at that within clubs, bars, recreational setting, the night knocks sort of setting. We are doing work around that, and our focus is stronger. And actually, look, everything that's been said tonight just reinforces to me how difficult and complex this is. You're talking about 1 minute, you're talking about prostitution, drugs linked to that, car crime. We're talking about young people. We're talking about homeless people, people with mental health. This is the crime that's generated from it, the exploitation that's generated from it. You could go on for literally hours, and we talk about the budget. The budget needs to be millions. But going back to your point, there's so many facets to this. But when we look at somewhere like Shoreditch, for example, and the council will be able to bear this out, and our nighttime economy strategy, it's a violence hotspot, and I don't mean stabbings. It's like GBHs in pubs, fights, domestic violence hotspot of a Friday and Saturday night. It's sexual assault hotspot. It goes on and on and on and on. And our strategy towards that is due to drink and drugs, probably more drink and drugs. But we're not naive to the fact that people snorting cocaine and taking high-end drugs as opposed to maybe low-level street drugs cause us a problem, and there is a response to that. So look, I think what we try to do tonight is show you that our drug strategy is balanced across the piece. It's about targeting the criminal gangs. It's about targeting the ASB. It's about targeting the lower level exploitation of kids. It's got everything in it, but it's massive, and we've only got the capacity to deal with so much. So take your point. I think you are right. I think actually our focus is very much street based and open, because that's the bit that we can see. That's the violence on the street. That's the open people. We get the phone call, don't we, from someone saying we've got five people in our stairwell. I don't get many phone calls saying there's a bloke in a pub snorting cocaine on a toilet. Do you know what I mean? So there is a complex issue, but we do deal with it.
Sorry, I'll go. Sorry, Alec. You go first.
Okay. I was just going to say, the white paper obviously talks heavily around recreational drug use and some of the punitive measures that obviously the government are looking at for what they're purporting to be that sort of middle class drug use. I think it was in the paper that they used. We have done a lot of work around nighttime economy areas, obviously, but we're looking at, you know, the wholesale distribution of drugs to cut that usage. Also working with Turning Point, with Simon and his team in those nighttime economy areas around education for people. A lot of people wouldn't know the history around the cocaine that they're buying, or the organisation, the criminal network that might be behind that, or the link to violence, for example. So there's a lot of communication work we're doing with our media people, that from the local authority, also nationally with the Home Office as well, around, you know, education of people around the pains that are caused to all forms of drug use. It's not without consequence. So in terms of, you know, people going on a Friday night and snorting cocaine or something like that in a pub toilet. So we are looking at that, but of course we're not going to redirect resources into those areas from our crime hotspots or violent hotspots, for example. But there is a lot of work to be done with big business, with government, with colleagues with licensing, you know, around what we can do more without also being too resource intensive, taking it away from the areas that need it, around that sort of the exact areas where you mentioned, that, you know, recreational drug use.
We know the proportion of the perception around one part of the community getting targeted and another part not, we get that.
But I mean, my point is going to be that we're not going out to target communities. What we're doing is targeting outcomes of a drugs market and targeting the drugs market and the criminality that supports that. So, I mean, the guys have made the point. You know, the quote unquote middle class drug use in the nightclubs and so forth. The support to reduce that occurs. It's just with a very different partnership. It's just been alluded to. It's with the door staff. It's working with the SIA and training door staff. It's working with the club owners, working with the licensing teams in local authority and policing to make sure that we've got firm commitments from the businesses. But much like other parts of the legal market, it's about disrupting that marketplace. So targeting drug users has never been in this country or around the globe an effective way of reducing the violence and criminality associated with the drugs market. It's about dismantling the market. Also, as it happens, we're very, very poor at managing to disrupt supply. I mean, the evidence from the US in particular is very stark that despite record year-on-year increases in seizures, the cost and price of drugs has reduced, implying that actually supply is going up at the time when there's increased seizures. So if attacking the supply isn't an effective tool, and if criminalising users has for decades not been an effective tool, then it's the spot in between that we're aiming for, marrying up the public health approach to the users, but then dismantling that market. And it is a market; it's a business in a classical sense, and it's damaged by harming the demand for that product, which is the treatment end, and it's harmed by taking apart the mechanisms and the enablers of that market, whether that's the marketplace like the nightclub where you work with the door staff to deny use of that space, whether it's taking out the mid-level dealers and the re-up addresses or the county lines activity which supports the network on a street basis. That's our focal point, not on, you know, communities or individuals at that.
You know, okay, because when we're thinking about disrupt the market, we're thinking disrupt the market in its entirety, which people snorting coke in the club are part of. They are part of the symptom, the symptoms that we experience in Hackney. So I understand it's not about the user, but whatever streams or kind of city lines they get their drugs from, you'd expect it to be part and parcel of the approach.
So I've got a brief sort of follow-up. So for instance, if we look at violence against women and girls and the sort of messaging that's coming out about men taking responsibility and challenging toxic masculinity and things like that, you publicly see that communication coming out. So I guess, is there something similar the police and I guess the government could be doing, should be publicising that, I guess, how...
Yeah, I know what you mean.
There's a similar thing the police could be doing in regards to middle class.
Yeah, there's been some moves in this, and I haven't seen the research papers to understand how effective it was, but there has been campaigns like this before, you know, making the point about what you see as an innocuous and fun Friday night activity, but this is the pattern of violence and death and destruction which precedes that, either in the UK or in the global drugs market or in South America, wherever it comes. I mean, I think we would need to delve a little bit into the effectiveness of some of those earlier campaigns and understand whether it's something worth pursuing. But I mean, you know, those ideas are all the welcome things into this sort of adder environment, because it's whatever we prove can work, whatever we prove can reduce demand, can dismantle that market, then we're really keen to explore this.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think James has mentioned quite a lot of the work that is happening in our nighttime economy and around just responding to Councillor Demuri around publicity and awareness raising. We're working closely with the police because of our nighttime economy action plan and raising awareness, making sure we're working with licensee. This is where licensing comes from. And our nighttime economy now on a monthly basis, it does deliver a training around drink aware, drugs aware into our license licensing in our nighttime economy, and talking about publicity just abroad. Then this is part of what we are doing. We got vehicle messaging like this, you may be a drug dealer without knowing it, that's around NOx, and talking about the environment around NOx, saying every canister goes to a landfill. So we just bringing all that down and in awareness around the risk of laughing gas. You might think is not affecting you, but this is the impact on your brain, on your health, and all of that. So that all that are happening, we are doing that with our late night levy in the nighttime economy.
We are nearing the close, but I hope you indulge us with two very, very quick questions. So we're going to take them together. So, Councillor Garbutt and Councillor Young.
Yeah, I really appreciate just quickly those comments that are just made at the end, because it definitely is focusing on the public health approach that has the biggest impact on people's behaviours. But I did have two extra questions, but I'll follow up with one of them outside. But I just couldn't leave this session without mentioning the lack of appropriate adults using the intimate strip searches. So the 7 out of 30 didn't have an appropriate adult, and I just wondered if you could, reflect on that and just talk briefly about what you're doing.
I'm not sure what figures you're talking to there.
The ones in the slides.
Sorry.
The 7. It's on page 24. The slides that were up earlier. And it says that there were 30 searches and 23.3% didn't have an appropriate adult.
Okay.
24. It's the one with the little pie charts in the chart. Oh, yeah.
So Councillor Young is going to piggyback on top of that. Yeah.
So just to add to that and to broaden it, one of the things we haven't really talked about is data and the transparency of data more generally. And I suspect you'll need to answer this afterwards. I'm just wondering, transparency of data is really important in ensuring success across the partnership, and the data that we see, the data that the public sees and understands. Can you come back to us perhaps afterwards and tell us a bit more about how the BCU shares data with partners, and also how proactive you are about doing that, and how data is made accessible to the public, and what sort of plans you have for increasing that if you think it does need increasing. So how are you sharing data with partners, and how are you sharing data with them?
Just go in reverse again. The data issue and the information on partners is a difficult one. We have traditionally allowed our systems to be used within the integrated gangs units, etc., and we've given license for non-police staff, non-police personnel to use our systems and interrogate those systems. The central direction is that cannot happen anymore. There may well be issues, data issues, born out of maybe the breach of the council and other aspects across London. That means the Met and the Commissioner has reviewed the legitimacy of that. He talked to it the other day. We are looking at our data. He is specifically looking at our data being more precise, and how we share that data. I don't think we've got an answer at the moment. I think it is within his mind. The boss might know a little bit more about that, but I think there are issues in our previous data sharing, how far it went, and the ability for them to access quite sensitive data.
It's a difficult balance. I mean, the dare to share principle that we want to try and enable the partnership by sharing as much data, holding as much data in concert, is really important to us, but it's counterbalanced by some really powerful data protection legislation and principles which we're obliged to follow in some of the reviews and scrutiny we're put under by central bodies over our use of data and understanding, and the responsibility the Commissioner has as data controller for the Met Police. And it's in that balance that this challenge is being sort of fought out between those two provisions. And at the moment, yeah, as Stan says, there's some curtailment from a central level on the way in which we share data. It's going to take a bit of time for us to work with both Scotland Yard and the local partners to understand what that means. And clearly, our objective is to continue to share as much as we can. I mean, if you looked at every serious case review for the last 30, 40 years, data sharing has been a central part of the recommendations. So it's, this is not the police trying to withdraw, this is the police caught in a bit of a tricky situation between data protection legislation and our obligations legally, and then our desire to work effectively in partnership. But that is still being worked through. So, I mean, it might be something we have to come back to in a couple of months as things work through at the yard and we get a better understanding of what the legal implications are. I think we're still a bit lost on the data that you quoted.
I've got it, and again, it's our data. We should know it, so I can see the point. I can't work out whether I've had this data explained to me. I can't work out whether this is in custody and out searches, because that seems like a lot to me. I know for a fact that since childcare we haven't done an in-tip search in Hackney. I think this is custody data as well. It was explained to me that actual research has been done. There are a couple that have missed appropriate adults and haven't had appropriate adult presence. But my understanding is that those couple work because of the ages given by the children, i.e., they've given an 18 or older date of birth when they were stopped or brought into custody, and that has been explained away. I don't think there's any in-tip searches that we've done since Child Q without an appropriate adult in or outside of custody. Now, they can't be done in custody without an appropriate adult anyway, full stop. And the custody sergeants have always been pretty tight about it, and that's governed by a sergeant in custody and an inspector. But if you would permit me, I'd like to go away and just clarify that and make sure I've got accurate data for you. But I think where we've missed appropriate adults is because of the ages given and the initial encounter has been taken on merit that are overrated, and we've found out subsequently they're not.
Yeah, it would be good to get that specific information given the information. Thank you. I think there was just one other query in respect of section 60 information as well. I should have asked, we didn't get through all of our questions, as you can imagine, so we are going to have to harass you further or contact you further with some additional questions. Sorry, and subsequent to us getting back to you with any kind of suggestions and ideas to kind of support the partnership work which is going on at the moment. Well, thank you very much.
Well, I mean, I've got a note of various things we've promised to write back on. Should we probably, Chair, just exchange notes on any additional questions you've got and what we think we've got taken away as a responsibility to come back to you on, and then we can provide a written response back on that collection if that's going to help.
We will do that. We'll send them through. We'll send them through to you directly. Thank you. So, essentially, I'd just like to thank all the members in present, both also online, including Councillor Conway, Councillor Hayhurst, Councillor Adams, Councillor Patrick, and Owen and peers have gone from Turning Point. We heard from you briefly, but the kind of overview provided for us was fantastic of the work that's going on. And again, we may be in touch with some additional questions. So thank you. As I said, please expect to hear from us again, but we really appreciate you being here tonight and also the work that you're doing across our borough. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Yeah. You.
Okay. I've got that fixed yet.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Good to see you.
Thank you very much.
So,
Yeah, don't.
Yeah, we've got.
Thank you.
Hey. Don't be jealous. Thank you. And welcome to Hackney, new Borough Commander.
Yeah, no, thank you very much.
Yeah.
A long first day.
Yeah.
Like with the rest of the week.
Yeah.
The rest of your tenure. I'll give him some chances to go on with it.
I mean, hopefully I'll see some of you as well in other meetings.
Yeah, we're hoping so too.
Trying to hit as many bits of governance as I can.
Okay, pace yourself.
Yeah.
I thought you were asking for it. No. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.
Sorry, it was so cold.
Yeah.
Cold, isn't it?
Take care. Bye.
Yeah.
Please.
Cheers.
Well, any kind of immediate yeah.
It's just us, I think.
The public one.
The public,
No.
public's still here, yeah.
No, we're still live.
Live.
Yeah.
We're still live.
But
Any
yeah,
immediate takeaways from that session? No, we're saving it all up. I'm going to send Claire a deluge of questions that we'd like answered.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go on.
well, I'd really like us to send them some quite sort of reasonably detailed questions on data, which you can't really ask in this kind of session. But I'd like us to get a bit more transparency around. Firstly, that wasn't the answer I was expecting. And that was a very worrying answer to say that actually, no, they're going to reduce the amount of data. And it's all about data protection legislation, which is not the right answer. But also there's some sort of more detailed stuff around when they were talking about the things I can remember, Merlins. I was thinking wizard. About the Merlins. So kind of, how many, what's the level,
The ownership isn't very clear,
what's
is
the
it?
answer, the outcomes, all of that stuff. I mean, I'm not going to take up loads of time now begging on about it, but I'll send you questions.
Yeah, and I wanted to follow up. I didn't get to ask about the out of court disposals, which I think is a really important point, because then we started to quite focus on kind of data and disproportionality, which I think was a good theme that we were really digging into. So I didn't want to then take us back to kind of diversion, but I'd be really interested to get their response on that. But I really appreciated the number of people we had and the responses that they gave. And it's there's a couple of bits on disproportionality I want to follow focused about. It's kind of his him being the new commander and it takes.
It's a narrative that we keep on hearing.
The other thing I was finding is that people like Swim and Turning Point. I mean, they're brilliant. They're clearly brilliant what they do, and it's really responsive. But I never quite get to the bottom of kind of, so what are the outcomes you're seeing? How are you measuring those outcomes? What's the long term?
I did try to get
5 years
there.
down the line, what are you seeing? A bit more of that.
Okay. Sorry, Craig. Craig's got to travel for. I'm not on mic. Okay. Agenda item 5, minutes of the meeting. The draft minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of December 2022 are included in the agenda pack for members to note and agree. Do members agree with the minutes of the meeting?
Agreed.
No amendments. Oh gosh.
No, not an amendment. I was just going to say that obviously following our meeting, there was quite a big exposure around the repair service by the Hackney Citizen, and I just wondered if we needed to kind of revisit anything within that context. I just thought it was quite timely that it was kind of around the same time. So it's just to make sure that we're following up on the scrutiny of
They did a report following that meeting. Also, we Caroline Selman and I sent a follow-up question to Clay and you, and Clay came back saying, I'll answer within 15 days or whatever it was, and we haven't had an answer.
I can follow that.
Okay.
Great. Just make sure that we're following those up.
Thank you. Agenda item 6, Living in Hackney Work Programme 2022-23. So you've all seen that?
Yes. What page is it on?
Right. Page 50.
We're almost at a whole term, aren't we? Oh no, we've got 2 left.
Time flies, doesn't it? Yeah.
Oh no, we've got 3 left. We've got like 1 a month.
Yeah.
Oh. I didn't realise they were that frequent.
We're in a big range of issues.
And we've still got the child queue,
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's March 28th, yeah.
March 28th. Okay. Everyone's seen that? We'll have that. Thank you very much. Agenda item 7, any other business? Thank you.
We're not going to be restricted in what we can ask in that.